Hello and welcome back to The Footballing Question. I'm joined by Jack Pitt-Brooke, the athletics correspondent for Tottenham Hotspur and England. Jack, how you doing, mate?
I'm good, thanks. Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, brilliant. So, obviously, we are almost 24 hours away from arguably Arsenal and Tottenham's biggest game of the season. How big do you think this game is for both clubs? And seeing as they're only 1 point away from each other and they could potentially both close in on a league title this season, as unrealistic as that sounds.
Yeah, it's a huge game for both clubs. I mean, we did have a really big North London derby pretty recently at the end of last season when both teams were going for fourth, and of course if Arsenal had won that game at Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, they would have got fourth. As it happens, Tottenham won. But in terms of both teams being in a title race, I think the last time we had a North London derby where both teams were going for the title in the same season, I think it's probably just about okay to say this about at this stage in the season, was, do you remember in 2015-16 they had that 2-2 draw at the old White Hart Lane in March when Tottenham were 2-1 up in the second half, and if they'd won that game they would have gone top, I think, ahead of Leicester City, but they blew it. Even though Arsenal were down to 10 men, Arsenal came back and equalised and drew 2-2. I think this is certainly the first season in which Arsenal and Tottenham have both been title contenders since then. So arguably this is the biggest North London derby for the last 6.5 years. It's obviously it's bigger because they are. This game would be huge if they were competing, if either of these teams were competing for the title against, say, Chelsea or Manchester City or Liverpool. But the fact that they have been probably the two best teams in the league so far this season does make it even bigger, because of course they will be desperate for obvious reasons to kind of slow down the other one's good start to the season. So yeah, it's a huge game, and I'm really looking forward to it.
I think for a while with North London derbies, or from what I can remember anyway, the biggest advantage a team can have is whether they're playing at their home ground or not. It seems that when one team has their home ground behind them, they're superior in the match. Anyway, do you think that that's still a thing that affects the North London derbies, or is it kind of the fact that, I don't know, both teams have progressed so much that everything's to play for this weekend?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that Tottenham have a bizarrely bad record at the Emirates, a record that can only be explained by, as you say, home ground advantage. Maybe there's a bit of a mental block they've got going there. Tottenham have only won once at the Emirates in the Premier League. That was the famous 3-2 win in November 2010. Since when, they've gone there 11 times and not won, which, given that for a big chunk of that time Tottenham have been better than Arsenal, particularly under Pochettino, and then in the last few years, for that to be the case does suggest that there are other factors at play. Like that is not a normal record that you would expect. It's not like Arsenal's record at Tottenham is much better, but it's there have been so few. This fixture is a little bit like the Ashes. It's very rare that the away team will win. The home team almost always wins. So that's why I think it would be a big achievement if Tottenham could win this Saturday. They would, in an instant, Conte would be doing something that even Pochettino never achieved. Although I'm sure Pochettino would remind you of the fact that they did win a League Cup game at the Emirates.
I was at that game. It was not nice. The only North London derby I've managed to get tickets to. Anyway, if there's one player that you think is vital for facing Arsenal on Saturday for Tottenham, who do you think it is and why? Obviously, there are a lot of Tottenham players having a good season, but one specific one?
I think I'd probably say Son Heung-min, because the way that the game's going to go is that Tottenham are not going to have a lot of the ball. We know that. Tottenham have been very happy to let Arsenal have possession, to let opponents have possession, and sit back and then try and play in a kind of possession efficient way. Whereas Arsenal are going to have a lot more of the ball and dominate, and that means that Spurs have really got to make the most of the opportunities when they do have the ball. Now, Son has been, started the season really badly. It was the worst we've seen him play, I think, since for the last 5 or 6 years. But he scored a hat-trick in the second half of Leicester City, and if he can be that good and that dangerous, then I think that Spurs will be able to hurt Arsenal on the counter, because they only need, the great thing about Son is they only need to like hit the ball over the top and he can run onto it and score because he's so quick and he's such a good finisher. If he's not on it, and if he's playing like he did in the first few games of the season, then Spurs won't have that same threat on the break. And if that's the case, then I think it's going to be really difficult for them to hurt Arsenal. I can kind of see Arsenal smothering Spurs a bit, just because they're so good in possession, and they can, I'm not expecting Tottenham to have much of the ball at all. So it's all really going to depend on what can Tottenham do when they do have the ball, and that's all down to Son, really.
What do you think is the biggest reason why? Because obviously there was a period when the pandemic hit, Arsenal and Tottenham both not doing very well at all. That season when they were both kind of both level, when they both finished, what was it, 8th and 7th? They weren't doing well at all. That period just after Mourinho and with Mourinho, what do you think is the biggest reason for Tottenham's kind of rise to success since then? Since kind of capitulating after Pochettino leaving?
Appointing the right manager. So much football is really, it's like 99% of football comes. No, that's not true. A big chunk of football comes down to, have you got the right manager in charge? And Tottenham didn't have. Daniel Levy made a series of mistakes, I think, from bringing in Mourinho, which was obviously a disaster. Bringing in Nuno, which was an even worse decision, and it basically took him 2 years, from November 2019 when he sacked Pochettino to November 2021 when he appointed Antonio Conte, to get it right. But he has got it right. Tottenham have now got obviously one of the best managers in the world, and that really explains the big step up that they've made. I mean, you can look at they have bought quite well. Since Paratici's come in as managing director, Kulusevski, Romero, Bentancur, etc. But so some of those players were there for. They had Romero under Nuno, and they weren't very good. So ultimately, I think it is as simple as saying the appointment of Conte in October, November 2021.
To finish things off with the North London derby, then, what are your score predictions for this weekend?
Well, normally when going into these big games, I often I think sometimes I overestimate how Spurs are going to, overrate how Tottenham are going to do, and I say they're going to win, they don't. But I think with this one, I'm going to go back. I'm going to go to 1-1. There was that long run of, I think, 3 straight 1-1s when Pochettino was in charge in this fixture, and I don't think Tottenham are going to be good enough. I don't think Tottenham are going to be good enough to win, but I don't think Arsenal are either. Also, I think it's the kind of, in this kind of games, like if it's a draw with, say, 20-30 minutes left, I think sometimes both teams will settle for that. I think both teams would probably take a draw tomorrow, which is which doesn't make for a great contest, because you want to see both teams going for it in the second half. But realistically, I think from Tottenham's perspective, they'll probably think they'll be delighted with a draw, not least because they've got a flight to Frankfurt on Monday for a Champions League game on Tuesday, and then for Arsenal. Maybe Arsenal will be slightly less happy with a draw, but even then it would still be. I think after what happened at the end of last season, they might be a little bit anxious, perhaps.